Well, hello there, fitness business nerds. It is Mark Fisher, Pete Dupuis, swinging in again for Michael Keeler, who is too busy hanging out in Hawaii, presumably being in paradise. But unlike Keeler, we love you. We're not going to let you down, podcast listeners. Who loves you? We love you. Before we get into today's topic, we're going to be sharing a little bit about our current and ever-evolving approaches to continuing education, which we balance with our work life and our family, as well as some interesting, juicy takeaways from some things we've been learning of late. I just want to let you know that Gym Growth Blast-Off, a 12-week gym marketing sprint with me, is currently opened up enrollment for our next round starting September 23rd. So if that sounds something that's of interest to you, if you're a gym owner and you want more leads and more clients, I'd love the chance to work with you. The goal of this program is to add 3 to 5K of monthly recurring revenue. And if we don't get you there, I'll just keep working with you until you do. So it's 100% guaranteed. Again, click the link in the show notes. Just go to our Instagram page at DMSGGBO. Or actually, you can write whatever you want as long as it's clear what it is. It's not like it's not automated. So you can just write a whole sentence if you wish. Pete, how you doing today, buddy?
I'm good. I like just watching you go. You should intro every single recording we do on the premise that Michael is in Hawaii.
Yeah, I'm kind of I'm like a AI practically. I mean, I'm just looking at me so smooth. Speaking of smooth and non sequiturs that don't make any sense, Pete, I'm excited to chat about this with you. It's something that we have connected with personally and professionally over the years. And this is an interesting moment for me as to not bury the lead. I'll tell you, I have read less than I have ever read in my life the past 6 months. There's some very specific reasons for that, not the least of which being a 2-year-old. But I'm excited to take a cruise through how you're currently approaching Con Ed, as well as things you're learning, things you're thinking about from what is currently on your continuing education docket.
Yeah, it's probably worthy of note that your less than you have ever read in your life over a 6 month span is probably 2 to 3x what most of us do when we're on our game. So
it's not nothing.
Prolific. It's definitely not nothing.
It's not nothing.
Which, you know what? My first takeaway from the last handful of months of consumption or under consumption is that we're all going to go through seasons of downturn in this front. And I recently moved with my family in the last, we're 2 weeks into our new house. And I'd say the 6+ weeks prior to that consumed every bit of bandwidth I had with packing and planning and getting things organized. And the thing that went first was my reading habit. And it's an unfortunate reality, but that's life, friends. And so I think that the thing is giving yourself the grace of saying it's okay, because I have historically lived in this life of like all or nothing, almost like New Year's resolution type habits. I'm going to read a book every 2 weeks this year. And so I'm definitely going to read 25 plus books. And then the minute you have a bad 2 week window where someone gets sick or you got a 2-year-old at home that got sent home from daycare and things get turned sideways, it's very easy to say, well, that habit got broken. I'm done. And I've been telling myself a lot recently, like, it's okay that I haven't been putting out content at a prolific rate or consuming it at the same time, because that's just the way life works. And I'm going to come out of this fog.
Yeah, very, very true. There are seasons. I very much relate to that. And, I don't have the moving houses excuse, but I do have the 2-year-old excuse and the desire to spend some time with my wife while I have a professional cup that runneth over at current. But it's interesting. I have really kind of scaled back to what I think for most people is the most practical thing. And to your point, even this is not viable 365 for every single person, but really just committing to the 10 pages per day. Just read 10 pages per day. It's the old saw of personal development. I still do a fair amount of audiobooking on top of that. And frankly, a lot of my education of late has been in the form of videos. And I probably am doing too much garbage podcasts, which is to say podcasts that are enjoyable and entertaining that I can crudely justify as good for the business, but in practice are probably bringing me no actual skill acquisition or value. And I shall not name the guilty there, just in case you're I won't tell you, podcast listeners, but yeah, there's a whole category of business podcasts I think are just fine, but are sort of like, for me, business education junk food. But today we'll be talking about some of the things, presumably, that we are learning and getting into that actually is interesting. And if it's okay with you, Pete, I'll go first. It's really top of mind. I have an article coming up soon about this book. It was recommended to my pal Vince Gabriel, who had it recommended to him by Mike Boyle, and it's called "What Happy People Know." It is a book from the early 2000s. It is in the genre of book of old curmudgeon wise psychologist people like Martin Seligman. Charlie Munger's not technically a psychologist. The name of the author's escaping. There's a Charlie Munger recommendation of a similar book called Too Smart Too Late, or Too Old Too Soon. And I do have this is maybe a thing to explore, this weakness for books written by, and I wish it was older women too, their curmudgeon, but it's mostly been older men that have a real psychology background and have a real brass tacks approach to personal development. And the gist of it is usually that life is unfair, unbelievable, horrible things are going to happen. Get on with it. Happiness is still possible. And this particular book, What Happy People Know, one thing that I've really been reflecting on, I'm writing an upcoming email about, which is perhaps so obvious, is that one of the core design features of the brain is scarcity. One of the core design features of the brain is you don't have enough. And the most obvious place this shows up is enough money, because nobody in the world seems to have enough money. Virtually everybody is just 20% under. If I just had 20% more, I'd be good, right? Whether that be in accumulated wealth or in income. But it's also true that, we think about even the Unicorn Society, right? Where when Jim owners work with us, we're trying to create more income, impact, and freedom. I think you can run into similar issues for not having enough freedom, right? Where you want more, more, more. And I certainly know some people that have done very well, particularly in the online coaching space, that, speaking candidly, seem quite troubled to me, because they've really optimized to not have a lot going on during their day. And then it causes existential stress. So you might think, okay, well, then the solution is service, right? Because when you're nervous, get in service, right? If if it's not really about the money, it's not really about the freedom, it's about helping people. Well, that too, I think, can get trapped in this game of quantification, where you're always seeking more impact and more service. And particularly for gym owners, I love you, gym owners listening, sometimes that's used as an excuse to justify not making any money or not having any freedom, because ostensibly you're doing in the service of a community making impact, which I don't think is great. So there's no real big takeaway for this, other than I think it's important for us to keep this in mind as we pursue whatever goals we have in life, that human nature is we always want more of things. And it's useful to challenge yourself to ask if that's actually true, or your brain tricking you, because maybe you do have enough right now. It's not to say don't swing big, but maybe you have enough right now, and maybe you can bring some more ease into everything you do, knowing that that's the case.
Yeah, it seems like a good opportunity for me to mention that our mutual friend, more so mine than yours, I'd say, Sahil Bloom, has a book coming out called The 5 Types of Wealth, which
Sure.
I've had the fortune of digging into in some depth. And it helps you to realize that there's more than just the bank account piece.
Yep.
There's your wealth is, it's your health, it's your network, it's your family, it's certain things. And it does kind of reframe that narrative a little bit in my own mind, when I realize quantifying the wrong things when I do the more thing.
Yeah.
And does fall into the category of something I have been reading and learning. To your point about the old stuff, the old stuff from the old people, one of the lessons that I stumbled upon by mistake during this move was we had to move a house, and I had to take basically my whole personal library and decide what stays, what goes, and where is it going when it gets to the
Yeah.
new house. And when I unpacked it, things felt new again, which was interesting to me. And there are books that I hadn't read for 10 plus years that all of a sudden were just jumping off the shelf at me and
Mm.
kind of making me excited to get back into it. And it reminded me that the current New York Times bestseller list doesn't really mean there's a lot of Hall of Fame books on it. It just means
Right. Yep.
what's selling better now than the other options there, which sometimes is just trash. And a lot of the stuff that we bothered to buy years ago is worth coming back to for
Yep.
sure. And another thing that I learned in that kind of vein over the years is that the way that I consume a book today will be very different from how I do it 5 years from now, just because of the changes in circumstances of what I'm doing professionally or personally.
100%.
And
100%.
the example for me on that front was years back. I read the book Rework because a bunch of
Oh,
people said
yeah.
read Rework. It's
Yeah.
really good. And I read it and I was like, this is stupid. I hate this book. I'm not getting anything out of this. This is dumb. Damn all of you who told me to read it. And I finished it because I'm one of those people who can't take that smart advice, like put a book down that's not working for you. I'm like, if I spent $22 on it, I'm damn well going to finish it. But I put on the shelf after finishing it, mad that I read it. And a couple years later, we decided to do a staff book club. And the team picked as a group Rework. And I was like, I'm not going to be that curmudgeon Mark was talking about, being like, that book's stupid. You all shouldn't read it. I know better. And I begrudgingly reread it and loved it. Like it just spoke to me in that moment in time. And so there's probably some stuff on your bookshelf that has a lot of value that is waiting to be kind of tapped. And so when in doubt, go to the archives. It's been interesting to
Oh,
go
yeah.
back to some of this old stuff. And I've been flipping through a lot of old business books in the last 2 weeks since we started unpacking.
All my books are in Keeler's basement since I made the move back to the city. I feel like part of my body is up there in Pauling, New York, in Keeler's basement.
Well, now that I know that, when we go for our annual planning in December, we're going straight to Keeler's
Yeah,
basement. I
we
want to
could.
shop your library
We
because I know
could.
how many books you've read. There's
It
gold
is
in there.
many. There are many in there. Are there any takeaways from Rework? Anything that you're like, oh, that's a useful thing for gym owners to consider?
Oh, it's not for that example. That book club was like 5, 6 years ago, and
Oh,
the
okay.
initial reading
Okay.
was 3, 4 years before that. So that
Oh,
is
yeah. You're just
not
saying
that's not
generally
current.
go reread books. Yeah.
It was an example of the reread.
Yeah.
I reread I reread Purple Cow, and I don't know that I have any like massive hardcore takeaways. I was just reminded of how much I love Seth Godin's communication
Yeah.
style, and it caused me to put "This Is Marketing" in my bag yesterday,
Yeah. Yep.
so that because I'm
Yep.
someone who always carries a book just in case, like I have a meeting that's not starting on time, or if I find
Yep.
myself waiting at a kid's sporting event for practice
Mm-hmm.
to end. I like to have kind of that book that I read, not even in the 10 pages a day format you're talking about.
Yep.
Sometimes it's like I get a page and a half and then
100%.
here I am putting it back in the bag.
Yeah, I talked with Ari Weinzweig Zingerman about that once, and he said that was his secret. It's just he's not shy about reading a half page and putting it down and going on. Yeah, Seth Godin, I imagine listeners are all aware of Seth Godin, but he is the thing that I really appreciate about him is he is a marketing legend that, in his way, I think kind of came out of a direct response, person development 70s space. But he really looks at marketing as an act of creativity and generosity. And that is not the way it's looked at by a lot of the other names, particularly that came out of the direct response world, where they're sort of comically playing up the character them of value extraction person that just wants money, which is okay. And I've learned a lot from those individuals, and they're often not a values fit for me too. So it's a little bit of there's a little disconnect there sometimes. I have learned a ton from them. And I think maybe another important principle of education that is important to consider is how capable you of really learning valuable things from people that are not a vibe fit, right? Because I think it's very easy to discount noted thinkers, noted business coaches, whoever. They're just not a vibe fit for you. And I think oftentimes those are the people that maybe have the most valuable things that you can learn from. Maybe you don't do those things in the way that they do, but I think that's an interesting. Again, we don't want to name the guilty here, but an interesting thought experiment I'll leave you. And Pete, maybe you and I can afterwards can share, or if we see you at a retreat, maybe come up to us after we've had a cocktail or two, and you can ask. But I think an interesting question is who is who is a business thought leader that you personally do not like, you just do not care for, and yet you concede there are many things they say that have been valuable for you to learn. And you don't need to answer that, Pete, because I know you're we're impeccable with our word here on this podcast. And I even will couch that by acknowledging that my own personal approach to this is, if there's, as Ari Weinzweig says, you get furious, get curious. If there's something about someone that's not vibing with me, I want to acknowledge usually that's more about me than them anyway. But it is true that, I think that a human nature sometimes is to discount people that are not a vibes fit. And as you think about your own education, I would encourage you to, A, get curious about what that is, because there's probably some information there. And then B, ask yourself, what is it that they do that you would benefit from maybe doing a little more of?
I love this point, because one of the things I was going to share with you was a suggestion that people force themselves outside of their comfort zone a little bit. I mentioned to you pre-call that I'm reading 48 Laws of Power right now.
Yes, yes.
And there have been multiple moments. I'm probably only about 25% of the way through it, but it's long. Like it's
a long book. I've never
several,
read.
several
I think I've
hundred.
audiobooked the abridged. I audiobooked the abridged. I didn't even
Yeah.
read the full.
Yeah. Well, according to my Kindle, which is a different number, it's 800 pages, and so I'm like battling my way through it. But there are moments where I just feel slimy with what I'm consuming. Like I just finished a law that was basically saying like steal credit for other people's thoughts. Like it was basically what it was. Like if there's someone smart beneath you on the food chain, go ahead and take it and pass it off as your own. That's a law of power, and it's not in any way. In my mind, it's not in any way going to influence like dramatic shifts in my behavior, but it is helping me to change the way I look at other people's behavior and think about some of the people who have habits or tendencies. And I find myself, it's like watching a car crash in slow motion, reading it, because each time I'm like, oh, I hate that this is being positioned as like a hack, a life hack. But I can also think of countless examples around me where people are abusing these laws of power. And I think it's just making me better at being cognizant of how I'm being manipulated, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But long story short, you don't always have to agree with what you're reading. You can still learn, even if you're frustrated by what you're hearing.
Yeah. So I remember the audiobook too is read in a very chewing the scenery style. It's like never outshine the master. It's very like how to win friends and influence people for supervillains is how I always describe that book.
Yeah.
And a lot of those things, because I think what Robert Greene would say, I think I've heard him talk about it a little bit, is he's like, look, I'm not even saying do or don't do these things. I'm just saying this is the way the reality works. And it actually reminds me a little bit of that particular law, never outshine the master, is an interesting, she's an interesting one, because I do think I've seen versions of that happen in the world. There are a lot of professional and even social arena where, based on what status various individuals have in it, how one navigates not triggering the people with more status is an interesting thing. And in fact, there's a really wonderful book called The Moral Animal, which is one of my favorite books of all time, which is essentially uses the biography of Charles Darwin to lay out a lot of the theory of evolutionary psychology, which is to say the way our pursuits of status and treasure and sex are influencing the way that people are moving in the world. And Charles Darwin is used as an example of hewing towards this particular principle of never outshining the master. And it's an interesting story how that a lot of his persona, and again, this is just my understanding of this author's analysis, not to say that he was disingenuous, but he was very much not about himself. He was like about the work, and that's all that mattered. And then later in his career, some other guy was actually about to publish a study at the same time, and he like sharp elbowed his way and leveraged all these relationships he'd built with more powerful men to sort of make sure that he was the one that got credit for the theory of evolution. That's maybe an uncharitable interpretation, and it's been a while since I've read the book. Asterisk, that's also a book I've read 3 times, I think, to date. And I think I'm probably ready to do another Ring Around the Rosie.
What was the name again? I
The
intend to
Moral
investigate.
Animal. Yeah, The Moral Animal is one of my all-time favorite books. I should note evolutionary psychology is a little bit controversial in some circles. I find Robert Wright, the author of this book, who's also like probably one of my favorite thinkers and philosophers, he wrote an equally excellent book called Why Buddhism is True. He is a really brilliant and I think very intellectually serious guy. He's a great podcast I listen to from time to time. And I don't find anything about his interpretation of evolutionary psychology to be, I find it very persuasive, is what I'll say at it. But there's a lot of people that say that, that it's not a perfect model, which is probably true to say about anything. So I'll pull up there, and more educated readers that care, and more educated gym owners that are interested in nerding out with me about evolutionary psychology. I look forward to your emails and your perspectives.
Also, can I make one more reading?
Yeah, I was gonna say we're running out of time here.
One more recommendation.
Yeah.
Before we wrap. Yeah. Yes, Keeler's always really good at keeping us in that 20-minute window. But we run wild when Keeler's not here.
Keeler's not here. We can do whatever we want.
I know that every year. I know that every year I'm going to hit a moment where I feel not interested in certain books, or just like I can't find something that's capturing my attention. And this is a shameless plug that you didn't ask for, but you send a book review via email every year, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
Or kind of a list of stuff you consumed.
Yeah.
And I always archive it so that when that time comes, I can just search like Mark's Goodreads sort of a deal. And one of the things that you changed either this year or last year was you highlighted in bold the handful that you thought were particularly good, instead of like, here's the whole list.
Yes.
And you made it kind of easy to skim, because I don't know, there might have been 5 to 7 that you bothered to make bold and say this one was among my favorites.
Yes.
And whenever I'm in a little bit of a book or content rut, I go to that list. And it's why recently I read 10X is Easier Than 2X, because it's one of the ones that you highlighted this year. Yeah. And I really enjoyed it. And it's nice when someone else does the vetting for me and gives me the brief summary. So listeners, if you're not on the email list, now's the time, because that email will come out in Q4, I would imagine. And it's been a really good resource for me for years, to be honest. So thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Well, in fact, we recently made, funny you say that, Pete, as we close up things here, we recently made actually a PDF report of my favorite books, I think on 5 different topics that you can download. If Rosemary is a careful listener to this recording, she'll put in show notes. And if not, you can go to Instagram and just DM book list, and Rosemary will get you a copy of it. But yeah, if you're looking for my list of both my all-time favorite books, my favorite business books, my favorite books on topics like finance, you can go get that report and fill up your coffers, fill up your Amazon wish list.
Beautiful.
All right, friends. Well, thank you so much for coming to our completely rogue Michael Keelerless Business for Unicorns podcast. As a reminder, if you're a gym owner looking for more leads and more clients, I'd love to have you consider joining me for the 12-week sprint. I'm personally involved in this, by the way. I am personally in that Facebook group. I'm giving you feedback on all the things you're doing to help you get success. And to find out more about that particular program, go over our Instagram, click the link in the show notes, and DM us the word GGBO, Gym Growth Blast Off. More leads, more clients, anything that will help Rosemary understand what it is that you want. All right, Pete.
Good talk. Go put some pants on.
Pleasure. Godspeed, listeners.
See ya.